Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our webcast viewers. My name is Willa Black, and I'm Director of Canadian Club Toronto and your host today. Viewers, thank you so much for joining us. When we begin our season each September, we're very aware of the fact that few clubs or organizations have consistently attracted the caliber of guest speakers that we are fortunate enough to attract. We don't take this distinction lightly. We work hard to keep you interested and to keep you engaged, to respond to your information needs, and to create wonderful networking opportunities. I think we are as relevant today as we were when we first began 122 seasons ago. Because despite the digital age, we know that members and guests still want to hear directly from the newsmakers and leaders and decision makers of the day. And that's what we have here on our stage. And before I introduce them, I'd also like to thank the Credit Union Association who have sponsored the participation of the youth and young leaders joining us this afternoon from the Rotman School of Management. Welcome and thank you for attending. And now I'm going to introduce our panel. According to the Ivy Business Journal, corporate sustainability combines the pursuit of profitability and growth with the desire to pursue broader societal goals, impacting environmental sustainability, advancing social justice and equity, and driving economic development. Corporate sustainability is more and more being seen as a driver for those organizations who not only understand their responsibilities as corporate citizens, but who can also leverage their unique capabilities to drive change and to set the example where it is needed most, as together we tackle some of the world's most intractable and pressing issues. We've assembled a fine group of corporate sustainability experts to tell us more today. Andrea Barrack is the VP Corporate Citizenship at TD Bank Group. Under her leadership, TD recently launched the Ready Commitment, its new corporate citizenship platform. Prior to coming to TD, Andrea was the Chief Executive Officer of the Ontario Trillium Foundation. The foundation distributes over $120 million in public funding to the charitable and not-for-profit sector. Robert Fosco is Vice President, Environment and Corporate Responsibility at Export Development Canada, EDC, where he has been recognized for his leadership. Robert's experience includes being seconded to the Consulate General of Canada in Seattle, Washington, which must have been so fun, by the way. There he led the mission's trade and investment efforts as Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner. Brendan Seale is the Head of Sustainability for IKEA Canada. This means he oversees the IKEA People and Planet Positive strategy. Previously, Brendan served as Sustainability Advisor with the Natural Step Canada and worked in communications with Barrack Gold Corporation. Today's panel moderator is Phillip, who co-founded Public in 2008 to disrupt the ways companies think about doing good. His company designs social purpose brands, community impact strategies, and social change campaigns. Phillip, I'm very happy to pass the Canadian Club of Toronto podium over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Very. My job today is to keep these rowdy folks in check. We had a warm-up conversation. This is a really exciting topic that I know we have a very forgiving and engaged audience around this idea of disruption in corporate sustainability. And just to kick things off, I suspect we have a very aligned room, but just to kick things off, we're going to do a little show of participation. So I want to ask a show of hands to some of the interesting things that have happened in the world over the last little while to see whether you agree or disagree with it, all right? I wish I had visual to show you, but I'm going to just describe them. So the first is, so if you agree, you're going to put your hand up, and if you disagree, I'm going to prompt you for that as well. So the first is, tell me, do you agree with the idea that Starbucks, when they introduced free college tuition for all of their baristas? So all those who agree, show of hands. Okay, so most. Disagree? Where are the brave souls? Okay, at least we got one. That's good. Mountain Equipment Co-op and Dick's Sporting Goods, also in the U.S., not stocking Vista products post-Parkland, Florida shooting. Good decision to ban it? All those who agree? Okay, disagree? Okay, we got a few, that's good. Patagonia in the last 6 months took the President of the United States to court for not protecting public lands, really leaning into that issue. Is that those who agree with Patagonia's decision? Okay, a few. Disagree? No? No one? Okay. A lot of people on the fence on that one. This just happened. Ben & Jerry's introduced, they're going to make a whole bunch of ice cream flavors to support Democratic candidates in the upcoming elections, in the midterms. Who agrees with that? Good idea? Bad idea? Okay. And then finally, the NBA. For those who love basketball and the Raptors, they canceled their All-Star game in Charlotte because of the gender discrimination law that took place at the time. Was that a good decision? Who would agree with that? Quite a few. Disagree? Okay, so we have more agrees than disagrees. But I think, what's so interesting is this discussions around disruption. And we're living in some very, very interesting times where things are overtly political, where companies are having to navigate a space in a very, very different way than they had to before. And part of what we're finding, and I gave those examples because you're seeing companies who are leaning into issues, you're seeing companies who are leaning out from issues, and there's a much greater expectation of companies today. Whether it relates to diversity and inclusion, whether it relates to how you're going to treat your employees and tackling their mental health challenges, whether it relates to their supply chain, right? You can go on and on. The expectations around corporate sustainability today are much higher than they ever once were. The same way that they would say that a teacher's job in the classroom is no longer just to teach, it's to take care of children and all the issues that surround. I think we're seeing the same kind of things happening with corporate. And yet the tension is, of course, that we still are tied to the idea of the quarterly earnings report and the profitability that has to come with that, which creates an interesting tension. And so companies are trying to navigate that. And of course, it's creating stresses, both positive and negative stresses on the companies. And so today, what we want to talk about is some of those disruptive trends, some of those things about how do we navigate this brave new world where we're seeing that disruption across the board. What do we do about it? And so we've got three great panelists who are going to shed some light. I will say that we've got some questions, we've got some rapid fire questions, but there's also obviously an opportunity for all of you where there's a wealth of experience in the room. So please ask your questions throughout as opposed to waiting at the end. And I think Colleen's going to come up and we'll try to weave them in. So if you have a burning question, don't hold back. You can ask it sooner and we'll try to weave it in, but we'll certainly leave some time at the end. So my first question is for Andrea. And it relates to the relatively recent statement by Larry Fink of BlackRock, who made a very symbolic move by saying that as they look at their portfolio going forward, if you are not addressing sustainability in a significant way, they're no longer going to invest, right? And where there's a big gap between, I think, that statement and where it's going, but it was very, very symbolic. And so we're seeing this shift happening when people like Larry Fink are saying this. And so my question to you is a two-part. Number one, how far do you think we are away from this triple bottom line, this shared value, this profit with purpose economy that we're talking about? And what would be your argument to the cynic or the skeptic who says, this is all nonsense, right? We got to get back to just maximizing shareholder value, which is all about profitability, full stop.
Okay, thanks, Phil.
Easy question.
Warm us right up with Ben & Jerry's and then right
there you go.
Okay.
There you go.
That Larry Fink was really interesting because I do think it depicts a real pivot that we're seeing. And so I have the opportunity to work with all different kinds of people across our business, and I would say some of them are the skeptics. Mm-hmm. And folks can be optimistic in their approach to these things, or they can be more cynical in their approach. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. So how far away are we? It depends where you think the end is, and it also depends on where we are. Mm-hmm. What we do know is that there are rising expectations for companies to behave in a way that demonstrates their purpose and in a way that demonstrates that they have a positive influence on society. And in fact, when people say, what do you do? I think that's what I do. I try to demonstrate that TD Bank has a positive influence on society. And we do that because we understand that, in fact, it's expected from all of our communities and our government stakeholders and people who bank with us. We know that customers are increasingly making choices about which products and services to buy based on, does this company's values align with my own? Do I see that there's an affinity there? We know that there's a war on talent. And the best and the brightest people want to work and stay working for companies that align with those values. And so obviously that leads to the bottom line. But I think what Larry Fink said actually is increasingly important because investors now care, because they are seeing that that matters. And so, part of the work that our team does is actually helps to answer some of those investor questions and participate on readying for those investor calls. And increasingly, ESG things are at the top of the list. And so if you are cynical and you believe that everyone operates out of their own self-interest, then we are going to actually continue to still move closer to that bottom line because it actually makes sense for the business to do so.
That's great. So 2 years and there'll be full shared value across the bank?
Well, that's why I said it depends where you are and where you think they're going to go, but yeah.
Excellent. A question for Robert. So one of the trends that I think we're seeing a lot of is the notion of transparency, right? And a big part of what's driving transparency today is the technology, right? We're all sitting and attached to our smartphones, and so people can find out information much quicker. And you can't sort of bifurcate. You can't sort of run your business over here and then do some other aspects that might contradict over there because people can find out in a heartbeat. And so a question for you is how do you navigate, and what have you seen with EDC, how do you navigate that transparency, and what are some of the biggest challenges related to it? Because it's one thing, it's easy to say we should all be more transparent, companies need to be more transparent, but there's a lot of issues with that, and a certain level of transparency can hurt the business as well. So how do you navigate that, given the world that we're living in?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because as a Crown Corporation, EDC, for those of you not familiar with EDC, Crown Corporation working to help Canadian companies grow and succeed internationally by providing financial solutions and connections. And being a Crown Corporation, the expectation of being more transparent, our shareholders, the federal government, is higher. And we have to balance that. It's a delicate balance with operating as a financial institution with commercial confidentiality of our customers. So there is a delicate balance in terms of transparency. But I would say transparency on two fronts. One is about how do you better describe the work that you do, how you do your work. And so some of the things that we're starting to learn is not just about the customer information, but how do we do our work from a CSR perspective, for example? How do we do our due diligence, putting that online, making that more accessible, disclosing information about the business that you do. And we've consulted a lot of our customers. In fact, they've said, we want to be more transparent. We want to be out there. Where they draw the line is we don't want it to be a competitive disadvantage to us vis-a-vis our competitors. So there's always that fine line. The second piece on transparency is really about telling your story, and I think with all of there's a lot of distractions out there and quick news and fake news and whatnot. How does an organization really tell their story better? And so as EDC, we're looking at who we are, what our purpose is to help Canadian companies grow and succeed internationally. From a sustainability perspective, we want Canadian companies to be internationally recognized as leaders in sustainable and responsible business. Why? Because that's going to give them the competitive advantage they need. Right. And so when we talk about transparency, it's really about staying on your message, who you are, tell people why you're there. You're not just there providing financial solutions. You're there to help Canadian companies grow. And we believe that doing it in a responsible way will give them that advantage. Coming back to Andrea's point about that's who people want to work for. That's the.
And is there an example that you can think of that where one of your customers, a company that's really sort of leaned into the transparency and saw it as a real competitive advantage? Is there one you can think of for the?
Yeah. So and it's interesting. There's I use the example, and it comes back to the question that Andrea talked about in terms of the first question. In the textile industry, for example, we work with a lot of companies in the textile industry and who source their garments and products from abroad. And sometimes when we work with them, when we ask with them, well, where do you know where you're sourcing your stuff from? Do we know? Are you clear about where it's coming from? Do you have policies in place? And quite frankly, a lot of the some are really in tune, with human rights abuses and conditions in some countries. And others, some of the smaller ones, EDC is we have over 10,000 customers. The vast majority are small, medium-sized enterprises. And some of them are saying, well, it's a cost to me. I don't know. I deal with one company, and I don't know where they get their merchandise. And frankly, it would be tough for me to do that, and it would be very expensive. And so when we start to turn the conversation to, okay, well, what do you really want to get at? Who are your target customers? Well, we really want to sell to the Walmarts of this world or the Hudson's Bay. And okay, but do you know that they are starting to ask about their supply chains and where their customers are, and so when they start to see that there's a value add to doing that, they're putting policies in place, to understanding where their goods are coming from, because then they are more attractive to the Costco's and the Walmarts and the Hudson's Bay Company, the light bulb goes off. And so that's, and so then you see companies start to be more proactive in having policies in place, understanding their supply chains more, and they're leaning into that issue and being open about it because they know, quite frankly, it's better for business. So, and that's where I think the social good and the good for business really come together. That's just one example.
So I want to go to Brendan, and you talked about sort of that, Robert, about the leaning in, and IKEA has been a company that I think has leaned into a lot of issues, and certainly has taken a real leadership role around sustainability. But the question I have for you, because you are so consumer facing, is this trend we're seeing around corporate advocacy, right, and corporate activism. And the example that we're all familiar with, because it just happened, and so much has been written and talked about, is what Nike just did, tied to the 30th anniversary of Just Do It, and showcasing Colin Kaepernick, of course, which is an interesting move given the fact that they are the official supplier for all the uniforms in the NFL. And the NFL has actually been quite quiet about it, and doesn't know how to deal with the whole kneeling issue. But they really leaned into it. And if you look at what Levi's, for those who know what Levi's did recently, where the CEO came out with a statement that they want to contribute to tackling gun control in America. So there's a lot of those examples where companies are leaning into issues. Obviously, some are reacting. And so my question for you is, as we're seeing this trend around corporate activism, how do you should companies be leaning in more? Should they be leaning out? And how do you do that in a way without alienating your consumer, right, and your customers, whether you do lean in or lean out? How do you tackle that? And what has IKEA found? And what have you guys done, given that you're quite an advocate?
I think sometimes that question might be posed as should we lean into this issue and take a risk, or should we lean out and stick to our core business?
Yeah.
And I think something that just to reframe that a little bit is that sometimes leaning in is actually really key to your core business. And so I think Nike's probably taken a real good look at that and thought, this is going to be good for our business. We need to stand here. And I think for IKEA, I mean, we are truly like a purpose and values led business, right? Our vision is to create a better everyday life for the many people. And our value set, we recruit based on values first and competence second, and we're really clear about that. And we want to bring people into our tent that share our values. And then consequently, we're also very, very willing and very committed to standing for our values. So when you think about things like diversity and inclusion, yes, it's the right thing for us to do, but also our coworkers would be asking questions of us if we weren't standing on these issues. So I think it's a little bit about the corporate culture and sort of what's expected. And so we feel a great sense of obligation, of responsibility to stand for the values that we hold dear as a company. And I think, so where we've leaned in some of our brand communication and marketing, we'll depict same-sex relationships and we'll depict, gender roles in different ways and all these kinds of things. That's really important because we want our coworkers to feel safe at IKEA. We want to ensure that they feel that they're being represented in the way that we put our brand forward.
And can you talk a little bit about, there's a spot, you shared it with me beforehand. So there's a spot that's out now, but it was a remake of a previous spot, right? Where the lamp, and you see this poor lamp and it's hanging out in the rain and it's left alone, it's abandoned. And then the crazy IKEA guy comes at the end, right? And says, it's just a lamp, people, it has no feelings. Go buy a new one. Now that same spot has just been redone where the ending is, hey, reuse that lamp. It's got an afterlife, right? Yeah. That shift, talk to us a little bit about that's actually quite a shift for IKEA. That's obviously consistent with values. That's been an evolution? Was that a big thing in terms of the communications? What's the thinking inside the company?
Yeah, I think personally, I think it's a great example of how a brand's voice can evolve over time, and we truly are a different company than when we were when that first spot was released in 2002. We had embraced sustainability as a strategy and as a notion, part of our kind of foundation at that stage even, but this idea of a circular economy and questioning the very notion of consumption, that would have been a really difficult conversation to have at that time. We've really evolved as a brand now to start thinking about some of those questions. And so it's not, of course, we're trying to sell high quality home furnishings available at a low price that as many people as possible can afford them. That's our business model fundamentally. But we also, as Andrea said, we're very dedicated to demonstrating that our growth is going to have a positive impact in the world. And for us to do that, we need to actually challenge this business model itself. And so we're now thinking internally, how do we move from this mass consumption model to one of mass circularity? And this brand spot that you're describing is really starting to tap into that, right? The secondhand sales market, we probably would have viewed that as maybe a threat or a latent threat in the past, and now we see that very much as an opportunity. There could be a whole bunch of reasons why people are shopping for secondhand IKEA furniture. It could be value for money and affordability. It could be convenience. They don't live close enough to an IKEA store that's accessible to them. But we actually welcome that and would see that by bringing more people into our sphere as IKEA brand advocates and lovers, there's an opportunity for us there. Maybe we can sell some add-ons. If they're buying a used sofa, we can sell them a slipcover that makes that used sofa feel like new. Or the rug or the lamp that makes the whole living room come together. And so our home furnishings expertise can still be of real value to someone who's shopping in the secondhand sales market.
Right. It's a great segue. A question for Andrea. So, there's obviously this trend. It's been a long time trend as we have to adapt and react to climate change. As part of the Ready commitment, you've made this a very significant commitment to the low carbon economy. And so my question to you, because so many companies are dealing with this and adapting, the tension around really tackling the low carbon economy, thinking about the circular economy on the one hand, but then for many businesses still, investing in and having practices that create tension with that desired end goal, right? Which is a real thing that many companies have to grapple with. So how do you grapple with that, and how do you sort of communicate that to stakeholders and consumers and customers that this is part of the journey? And so how do you grapple with that tension?
Yeah, and so for those who aren't familiar, as part of our Ready commitment, we did, as part of the Vibrant Planet driver, look at trying to target $100 billion by 2030 to invest in transitioning to the low carbon economy. And part of that, our goal is really, we want to elevate the quality of our environment so that people and economies can thrive. And we recognize that both are really critical and both are really, really important. We do all kinds of public opinion polling on this issue, as you might imagine, because we're quite heavily invested in the energy sector. And so that's been a focus of attention of the bank for quite a number of years. And what we found is that where people do have similar goals around wanting a good environment, that is not matched with behavior. So they still want to drive their cars. They still want to take a plane south to go on vacation. They still want to have air conditioning. And they still want to have the economy work. And they want to know that there's jobs. And so I think where we're left with, and actually it kind of goes back to almost the first question, is people's self-interest. So I think our belief is that we understand that we need to get to a different place where we're not reliant on the traditional energy sources that we've been used to. But we're not there yet. And people actually aren't going to be scolded into changing their behavior. If you actually look at it as a different approach, is how do we make people self-interested in choices that actually then benefit the environment? And so, solar panels is an excellent example of something that used to be really niche and something that only the hardcore environmentalists or really rich people did. And now the cost of them has become so affordable, and the business case for doing it has become so strong that people are now doing that because it makes sense. And so I think what we look at is it's a longer story. It's the time frame under which you expect to see results. We're not going to be there tomorrow. We have targeted 2030 because we believe that we can make significant progress by that time to be able to do that. But we want to incent technology companies and innovators and people who think outside of the box to come up with the solutions to what are pretty complex problems so that people will actually act in their self-interest, and that will also be the good choice for the environment.
And are you finding that organizations, many of which are nonprofit, who are who are really pushing the envelope in very positive ways in terms of taking a very hard stance, does that argument, is there a sort of a rapprochement happening with them? Do you think there's a greater willingness to accept that argument and the reality that it needs to move in this direction, but it can't be, it's not always a seismic shift that's going to happen overnight?
Yeah.
Or do you find that there's still that tension and that's okay because that's part of how change happens?
Yeah, I think the tension is on timing, right? So even when we meet, we have a number of shareholder proposals that come in on all kinds of environmental issues from folks like Greenpeace, would be a good example. And when we sit down with Greenpeace, we actually agree on what needs to happen. The difference is in what time frame under which it's going to happen, right? So that actually, if you've got the principles set, then you can kind of negotiate then some of the details on timing, and we recognize that there's, what can we help to do to incent that moving a little bit quicker.
Great. Robert, I know you want to get in.
No, I was just, I agree on the timing piece. There's also an expectation that some action is being taken. And I think there is some admit it, some won't, but that there is a timing question. I mean, this doesn't happen overnight. And some of the things that are happening in the world today, for example, the Mark Carney task force on climate-related financial disclosures. More and more companies are signing up to that. I know the banks were supporters. EDC is proud to. We issued a press release yesterday saying that we're now supporters of that. But that's about getting information, understanding what your business is like, understanding what the impact is, because you can't just act without information. So it's about getting a good sense of what your business is like, what is the impact of your business, and quite frankly, investors and shareholders are demanding it. And so as we see that convergence of the business community demanding it more, the civil society keeping to ask for it, I think it'll come together, but action needs to be taken, and so that's the kind of thing that I think concrete action will bring parties together.
So I want to take a question from the audience, so please keep them coming, and then we'll come back to some other questions that we have. There's always a danger that because I think all of us in this room, we've drunk the Kool-Aid. And so the question is that in the world of Trump and Ford Nation, we'll put the politics aside, are these notions pie in the sky? Is CSR, or corporate sustainability, at odds with populism? And I think that's a great question, because I think there is always that danger that because we all believe and we're believers, that we just assume that it's all moving that direction. So open question. Any of you can answer it, all of you can answer it, but we're going to keep it short. But is it at odds? Is populism today at odds with corporate sustainability? Who wants to go first?
I can start.
Please.
And I don't believe that it is at all. I think the story that's being told by certain politicians and so on about elitism, right? And I think that's where we have to be really careful. And so Andrea's made a really good point here about something like solar, where that used to be seen as something you'd have to pay more for that feature to have in your home. What we see in our business actually is that if you've got solutions that help people just live a more efficient lifestyle and can help them save money, they're on board. Yeah. It doesn't matter what political stripe they may come from. So I think it's just about really demonstrating that we're truly making people's lives better through this type of a transition. And I think sustainable development in its essence should be about that, and must be about that. That as we transition to a more environmentally friendly, sort of regenerative economy in terms of how it interacts with our natural environment, we've got to do it in a way that's more inclusive and more just and from a social standpoint as well.
And we also have to keep in mind that people who are environmentalists aren't just on one side of the political equation, right? And actually on any issue. And so if populism is about people feeling disenfranchised and not included, there are things in the CSR movement like transparency, like feeling like there's a level playing field in terms of the rules of engagement and how people are going to behave, like that internal fair work policies and diversity and inclusion, all the things that would lead to people feeling like they're not included are sort of coalescing, I think, to try to create that sort of more inclusive future and inclusive prosperity.
I was just going to add, we have a tendency to equate populism with a certain brand of thinking, but as we keep talking about these trends in terms of sustainability and the new generation, you'll see that in 10, 15 years, populism will mean, it won't be equated with one line of thinking. It will be equated with sustainability, more demand for diversity and inclusion, more demand for a more just society. And so I think the term populism may be equated right now with a certain line of thinking, but over time, I think there's a tipping point there. Malcolm Gladwell will probably have some views on that, but there's a tipping point. I think we're almost there.
So basically, our Premier Ford's mistake was that he should have made it buck a beer for organic beer, and then it would have appealed to everybody. Okay. I want a pet peeve that I want to put to Brendan, for you to start, but obviously invite Andrea and Robert to comment, is this notion of what we call the say-do gap. So, and what that means is that when you look at all the polling data, they will tell you that consumers will reward companies that do good things, that create value in the world, right? They'll pay more for products that are ethically sourced and ethically made, right? They will they'll frequent a company or a service where they feel that they're a good corporate citizen. But as someone who's drunk at the Kool-Aid, my experience is actually quite opposite. And it gets a little bit to, Brendan, what you were saying, that in fact, all things being equal, that is true, but rarely are all things being equal. And that price still dictates a huge component of this, right? And so we're seeing that while people say that they will do this, in fact, the opposite is true. And I'll give you one concrete example. When you look at, because we work on this issue, when you look at paper products and 100% recycled paper products, bathroom tissue, facial tissue, et cetera, people will tell you they'll pay more. Only 7% of Canadians actually buy 100% recycled paper product. And the reason they do that is because they look for price and they look for efficacy. And so there's lots of comments about how we'll do more, but in fact, the opposite seems to be true. And so my question, starting with you, Brendan, and then to the others, is how do you navigate that? Have you experienced that at IKEA? And how do you navigate this gap between what people say they'll do to support this sort of shift in the economy the way we would all like it to see, and the reality of where it sits today?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from the IKEA perspective, I just have to challenge the notion that you need to pay more for a sustainable product or for an ethically sourced product. I mean, our view of that is that if we can just use our scale and our supply chain and steer things in a better direction, we're fortunate in the sense that we do the volume, that we can bring the cost down on things like that. So I mean, when we made the commitment in 2012 to shift our entire lighting range to LED by 2015, we didn't know how we were going to do that. First of all, the technology for all the different bulbs and brightnesses and warmths and so on was not there. But we made the commitment, and through the innovation in the supply chain and working with the suppliers, then we got the innovation, we got the cost down, and now everything that we sell is LED. Right. So we don't sell them marked up high next to some bulb that has a lesser technology. So I think we have to reframe the question a little bit and say, if we can just offer people better products and better, including sustainable design, ethical sourcing, all these kinds of things, then we're winning. And if we can do that at an equal or lesser cost, then I think that's the winning recipe. Yeah. I will also say that, I mean, just getting back to my point about these products that can kind of help people live a more efficient lifestyle. I mean, those products in our range are selling at a faster rate than the range as a whole. So we actually do see that people are making choices to find ways to minimize the amount of waste that they produce in their homes and save on energy and conserve water. Even if in Canada, water savings represents a relatively small kind of dollar footprint compared to energy, we do see that. So I think maybe it's the IKEA consumer, the IKEA customer, but I think people are looking for those kinds of solutions, and our objective is just to make them available at the lowest price that we can.
Great. I wonder also, though, too, about, when you're asked a question on a survey, there's social pressure to answer the right way. When you're by yourself deciding what toilet paper to buy, you're going to go with maybe different kind of. So I was thinking, maybe it's actually this whole idea of conspicuous consumption needs to actually move to this area. Like I think about something like Tom's shoes, and has been a great example, but you were then branded as somebody who cared about the world if you were wearing Tom's shoes, right? And we don't have a lot of examples where it's obvious to others that then you're being a good corporate citizen or just a good citizen. And so, there might be an opportunity in that. And I know there's lots of burgeoning kind of fashion designers and others that have actually put out as part of their branding. And it's becoming a lot better known now that, our blue jeans use less water, or, and that I think will start to sort of grow and escalate as well.
Agreed. Some great questions coming from the audience. So let me ask some of them. Raoul, I'll start with you. What do you think will be the biggest challenge for CSR over the next 5 years?
I think the biggest challenge will be to make sure that we're not alienating the newer generation that's coming into the workforce. We see, I had the benefit of being on the HR group before this role, and more new grads or younger employees coming in will come into interviews and asking, what's your stand on this, and what are you doing about climate, and what about the SDGs, and how you're linking in, even before asking what the job is, what they're going to be doing, what do you think about volunteer work. So I think one of the challenges is how do we make sure as a society we're not alienating this generation of people who are coming into the workforce and want more out of their job, want to contribute to making the world a better place, all the while learning and progressing and going forward. So I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we're listening and we're adapting to that, because that could set us back, I would think. I think over time it'll be inevitable, but we don't want to disenfranchise sort of the next generation. That would be one big challenge I think we have.
Does anybody else want to jump in on that, or do you want to go to the next question?
I could jump in on it, I guess. I think being courageous is something that that as sustainability or CSR professionals we need to think about. We hold positions of influence with resources at our disposal, and a lot of these challenges that we're addressing are acute, right? They are acute challenges, and the sooner that we can address them in a comprehensive way, the less bumpy the ride will be down the road. And in addition to that, there's huge opportunity inherent in a lot of these challenges if we get it right. So having the courage to act boldly, I think, is something that we all should sort of hold dear. And in that, there may be actually a risk, of alienating some. And I think we need to be willing to do that. Yeah. Where we're going to take those courageous stands for what we believe in and what we have, what's driven by our values as organizations.
Totally agree. Andrea, a question for you from the audience. How important is marketing and communicating the commitment to social responsibility, corporate responsibility, and how best to measure that in terms of consumer behavior, demand, expectation, results?
That's funny that question came in, because if I actually answered the other question, it was going to be, I think one of the risks is having this be a marketing exercise and not a real exercise. Yeah. So we absolutely do need to communicate it. All of the reasons we talked about at the beginning, consumers want to hear from us about what it is that we're doing to have a positive influence on society. Our employees want to hear, our investors want to hear. And so those are very different audiences with very different needs. But if you don't tell your story and you don't get it out there, a couple of things. One is that you're not getting the benefit, but you're not also leading and influencing others, right? And I think about, for instance, one of the things TD is very proud about is our early stance on LGBT issues. At a time when that wasn't sexy or cool. And what our employees would tell you is why they're so proud about that is that they feel that because TD took a stand on that, others followed. And now it's normal. Yeah. And so I think if you don't tell your story well, you don't have the opportunity to lead change that actually really matters.
Agreed. So now they're coming in fast and furious. I'm trying to keep up here. A couple questions that people have asked around, give us some concrete examples. A company could be a leader that you think is really emblematic of where this is going, right? That's really leaning in, it's not just marketing, it's actually, and it can't be one of your own companies or a Crown Corp. But is there one that you would point to, either because you personally feel strongly about it or just think is a really good example of where this is headed and who's really embracing this level of not responsibility, but actually part of the business, social impact driving the business? Do you want to start?
Well, yeah, I was going to, just to echo Tom's, of course.
This is the circular response team right here.
Quite frankly, on my walk over here, I did see the big TD bicycle riding for the Heart and Stroke Foundation. So I thought
that was BMO, actually.
No, it was TD.
Okay. We saw it too, a BMO one. Okay, there's lots of bikes out there.
Lots of bikes out there, but it was a TD one. So I just wanted two companies that come to mind. Tom's is one, and that's the obvious one, because you buy one pair of shoes and they survive, but now they've branched into eyewear and whatnot. But another one that's that you of course people know about is Unilever, Paul Pullman and what they've done. And the reason why for me that's impressive is because they didn't have to. And in the business that they're in, the competitive nature of that business, they didn't have to do that, but they chose to take an aggressive stand and make a statement at a time when, frankly, even some of their own employees were thinking, what is this going to do to the company? And it's paid dividends, financial dividends, but it's also put them on the map in terms of being a leader in looking at sustainable production of their products and recycling and whatnot. So I think that's one that sticks out for me of the big ones.
I would say Nike, actually, and I would have originally said that because of their environmental commitments.
Yep.
They really have a commitment to multiply their growth while having their impact on the environment and really looking and engaging all of their employees and coming up with novel solutions. So internally and externally, that's great. And just personally, I thought the latest move with the video was pretty bold and liked it.
And Brendan, do you have one?
Yeah, I guess for me, I think of Patagonia. You mentioned them earlier in the conversation, and they're one that kind of was founded with that sort of ethos at heart. Tom's is the same way, and I think when you start a company with that in mind and then just live that through your whole existence, but I mean, absolutely no sacrifice on quality. It's great stuff, and then they're taking a stand and really driving it through their core business, but then also kind of taking this activist position. So they come to mind for me for sure.
Great. A question here around the income and wealth disparities. And the growing polarization is obviously a big issue today. And so the question is, when will we see large corporations make paying a fair share of taxes part of their CSR commitment?
Ooh, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'd love to take that one, Phil.
Figured if I didn't ask that, I would be told that I'm silencing the inequality. And given that your whole platform is on social economic inclusion, I mean,
yeah. Well, so I think the question is, does the tax rate that the government sets is that fair?
Exactly.
Right, because we do pay the government tax,
Yeah.
right? And so is the question, should we just pay double that? Well, no, we have an obligation to our shareholders, and that's we're a democracy, and people can vote on a different government with a different tax code. But I do think that the growing income inequality is an issue that we care about.
Yeah.
We are predominantly a retail bank, and if we don't have a strong middle class, we don't have a business.
Yep.
Right? And so are we concerned that people are falling behind and that they're not going to have jobs in the future and they're not going to afford to buy a house? Yes, absolutely. And we want to try to invest in those things and use our philanthropy, our human capital, and our business to try to build a future where people do feel like they actually are included.
It does beg the question too, is the solution larger companies paying more taxes so the government can handle these issues, or are these issues will be tackled by the private sector and the market? So how are companies using that maybe that excess tax that they would pay, but to do good and to really drive it into the economy as opposed to leaving it to government? So I mean, it's a philosophical question, but I think it's something that needs to be tackled.
How are we for time? Okay, we're going to do this. So we rapid fire questions to end it. We've actually covered some of them. Brendan, biggest worry you have for the future of business? Easy one. Easy.
Biggest worry I have for the future of business?
Yeah, or the biggest worry you have for where we are today?
Yeah, I think, I think about this a lot, that we, when we use expressions like the triple bottom line, and we create this false mental model that economy and society and environment are on a level playing field, and they're not, right? So our economy is a human construct that exists entirely within society, and our society is also a human construct that exists entirely within our natural environment. And I think that we're still operating largely with a mental model that is challenging. So the businesses we need to wrap our heads around how dependent we are on the ecosystem services in the natural world for our own success, and also on having a healthy, just society that gives us the conditions in which we can be successful as businesses.
Great. Robert, thing you're most excited about as you think about the work you're doing at the EDC, and or you can answer this one instead, what's the next biggest disruption going to happen to the space? You can pick either one.
Well, hopefully I can blend the two and saying
Sure.
we're going to be the next biggest disruption in the space. But I mean, really excited about telling the story more about EDC and our refreshed CSR strategy and the pillars and what we believe in helping Canada become leaders. And I think that's, I mean, being a patriot and purpose and having being able to work in a financial environment, but doing something for our country. I think that's what excites me the most, and I think we can rally the country around that and getting Canadians and Canada become internationally recognized as leaders in this space. I think the next biggest disruption is that tipping point where companies and shareholders will start to say, this is what we need to do to advance the bottom line. This is what we need to do, and shareholders start demanding that. I think we're the BlackRock example is a good one, and it's only gonna go from there, because I think it's gonna start with business, and business is gonna get it done.
Great. It's a good segue. Andrea, you get the last question.
Okay.
Milton Friedman, right? The sole responsibility of a company is to maximize shareholder value, right or wrong? I couldn't help myself. I had to ask Andrea that question.
I can tell. Right.
Okay, tell us why.
Well, I think some of it we've talked about already. Shareholders are starting to actually ask questions about this and demand this, and I think see that, in fact, CSR kind of strategies are actually good for the business. I think Milton also said that as long as they abide by the rules of engagement and don't engage in deception and fraud.
Yeah.
So we've talked about transparency being increasingly important, which actually I think helps guard against deception and fraud. And the rules of engagement, that is something that we all have the power to manage, right? Because we do actually, banking is a highly regulated environment.
Yeah.
So there's lots of rules about what you need to do on that, and government sets what those rules are, right? So I do think, yes, Milton was right.
All right. You get the last word. I want to thank, obviously, the panelists for an excellent discussion. I want to thank you all for your questions. And while there is lots of disruption happening, there's no question in the world today in the market, I know I am an eternal optimist, because in looking at how companies are behaving today, in the moves that are happening to really integrate sustainability, social impact into the business, while we still have a long way to go, it's truly happening at a much faster pace. And I think what you heard in this panel today and what you're all experiencing in your work is, this is not a fad. This is not just the next thing that's kind of fun and we're seeing in marketing. This is actually something that's taking root, because there's a greater expectation and demand amongst consumers and employees and shareholders to really look for how we're going to move towards a purpose-based economy. And while we have a long way to go, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. So I thank you all for coming today, and a great hand to the panel for a great response, a great discussion.
And hope.
Thank you, Phillip. And I also want to thank this incredible panel for a great discussion on how companies navigate this brand new world of corporate responsibility. As Andrea said, there are rising expectations on corporations to act with social purpose. And if you want to be a purpose and values-driven business, your words, then you need to commit to transparency and to put your brand forward authentically. Your customers demand it, your employees expect it, and as we just said, increasingly your shareholders want to understand what you stand for. This alignment of values is more than a trend, it's more than a fad, it's a hallmark of our time. This was a fascinating discussion from leaders on the front line, sharing your learning, your observations, your insights on how we can capitalize on this moment in time to, as Phillip said, push the envelope forward in positive ways to set strategies that will benefit all stakeholders. So whether it's tackling climate change, addressing issues of equity, or shaping development efforts, corporate social responsibility can change the world. I want to thank you also, Phillip, for your passion and for your leadership of a great discussion, and for showing organizations how to embrace sustainability in truly meaningful ways. So before we conclude, I now want to share some highlights of our October events. On Wednesday, October 3rd, Medhat Madi, President and CEO of the YMCA of Greater Toronto, will be here to speak about confronting the rising social challenges facing our communities. And on October 11th, Canada's 22nd Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Stephen Harper, will be at our podium to discuss his new book, Right Here, Right Now, Politics and Leadership in the Age of Disruption. So we hope you can come. Before closing, we'd like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. Thank you again, panel. It was a really, really fascinating discussion, and I think everyone enjoyed it thoroughly. We very much appreciated having you all with us. And thank you also for being here, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.